Hello to everyone this lunchtime, and thank you for joining us for today's Advice Line Live event. My name's Sophia, and I'm the Community Advice Services Manager here at Scottish Autism, and I'm joined by the lovely Caroline and Caitlin, both of whom are community advisors from our Advice Line team today. Thank you both for joining me and agreeing to kind of come along for this live event today. I hope I haven't taken you out of too busy a schedules to join. Um, Prior to the event today, obviously we put a call out for anyone that wanted to kind of put some questions in. We've had a chance to have a look at some of those questions that have come in, some really interesting ones that have kind of come into our inbox. And Caroline, Caitlin, and myself had a look at these to kind of see what we could potentially answer live today. We will try and answer some of those questions live. If we don't manage to get around to your questions, what we will do is get back to people individually to obviously pick those questions up as well. So please be reassured that you will hear from us either way. Um, Caitlin, Caroline, what we'll probably start doing is start answering some of those questions live. But in the meantime, for anyone that is watching, please, if you do have any questions, do pop them in the comments below. I'll do my best to keep an eye on them. Sometimes some disappear, but I will try and keep an eye on them if you do have any specific questions that you want to ask myself, Caitlin, or Caroline, and we'll do our best to answer those live. So, Caitlin, Caroline, as I say, we've had quite a few questions in for the event today, and I guess the first question was around somebody who obviously has a daughter at home, and very much looking for further support around supporting their daughter in terms of when showing signs of distress. It sounds like quite a stressful time for the family as a whole, not just for their daughter. And I guess, Caroline, what came to mind when you read that question?
I think when a family have any kind of concerns regarding a child in distress, certainly from the advice line perspective, what we like to do is kind of speak to the family or email the family, whatever's best for them, and really start to have a bit of a discussion regarding what they mean by distress, what does that presentation look like, and what are the factors that impact on that? Is it school, home? Is it, I mean, what is it that's going on? Is it a sleep issue? You know, is the child in distress for another reason? So very much looking at what's the underpinning things to look at that, as opposed to just looking at a strategy of support, actually beginning to understand what's actually going on there and trying to help us to look a wee bit deeper about what may be helpful to that particular family and that particular child who's in distress. And I'll let Caitlin answer, because there may be some other things that Caitlin wants to answer as well regarding that.
Yeah. And very much from our perspective, we like to work with the low arousal approach, which the marketing team has some links to share some more about that. But yeah, it's about kind of unpacking those individual aspects of distress and triggers with each individual family or individuals themselves. It can look so different. And then, like Caroline's saying, those root causes are really what are the things that we want to address first, and then umbrella effects of those, like Caroline's saying, common ones can be sleep, education, environment. What is the root of that distress, and can we take steps to amend the challenges within that?
And I
Yeah,
think,
sorry,
sorry,
Caroline.
Sophia, sorry, on you go.
No, go on, Caroline.
I was going to say as well, especially for families as well, when we're speaking to a family, it's also good to look at the parents or the carers. What support are they maybe presently getting? What support could be there maybe locally or nationally for them? So looking at that broader picture, it's not just the child, but it's actually the whole family network. It could be siblings, grandparents. So looking at that big wider picture of support for the whole family as well. Sorry, Sophia.
You've totally just said what I was about to say. So no, taking that whole family approach is really important. And I think I was also going to just make a comment around, obviously, in terms of our advice line, I guess more often than not, we may hear more from parents and carers in terms of their children, their young people, their young adults, especially in circumstances where they're talking about, potential distress for those individuals. And I think sometimes when parents and carers phone, and both of you, please correct me if you feel that I'm not quite getting this right, but Sometimes actually parents and carers not really being 100% sure maybe what that root cause might be for that individual. And sometimes we have to spend a bit of time, like you say, on unpacking that and exploring that, and we might end up at a completely different, I guess, juncture with parents or carers in terms of where that distress might be rooted from. But I guess what I was going to say as well is, you know, I guess the individual in question is also welcome to contact us directly as well. And I think that's probably you know, an important piece to highlight is that, you know, I guess if it's a young adult, then they're more than welcome to contact our advice line through whatever means is comfortable to them in terms of exploring that distress, because I guess they might have different perspectives in terms of where that distress is rooted. If it's a child or young person, then again we can you support some of that communication with agreement from parents, for example. So I think it's being mindful that, yeah, we want to try and support everybody within that family unit, and making sure that we're giving the best possible advice, support and guidance around that. But no, I agree. I think, you know, it's spending the time to explore things more than anything. And I guess in terms of that question, I know that we had quite a conversation around that particular question, because actually what we wanted to know was more about what was happening
Yeah.
potentially for that individual. So I guess what I'm going to say is this isn't the end of that conversation. We will be in touch with that person that submitted that question, to, I guess, explore things further, to kind of do that whole family kind of approach, that holistic approach, but also, I guess, to find out a bit more in terms of what can we support with, or what guidance can we give. I'm keeping an eye on the comments. I haven't seen any questions come in as yet. However, if anyone does have any questions, like I said at the beginning of the event today, especially if you've only just joined us, please pop your comments below, in terms of any questions that you might have for ourselves this afternoon. However, what we'll do in the meantime is continue with some of these pre-submitted questions that have come through. Our next question, I guess, was quite a broad question that we received, and again we had quite a conversation around it in terms of, we wonder what kind of advice or guidance this person might actually be looking for. And again, we may well get in touch with this person just to explore things further, because I guess that's the beauty of our advice services, especially the advice line, is that we can give that personalized advice and guidance. And I guess that does involve getting a bit of the narrative and a bit of understanding in terms of inquiries. But the question was around kind of what spaces are available for autistic people to access. And we thought, to start off this conversation, we thought we might talk a bit more about maybe some of Scottish Autism's offerings. So Caitlin, I'm going to hand over to you in terms of just giving us a bit of a broad overview in terms of what's out there in terms of
Yeah.
Scottish Autism.
Yeah. So our offerings, we have a few offerings depending on where you live, or online spaces, whatever may work best for you. So we have our Click and Connect program, which is an online program, and it's quite interest based. So we've got groups that are around mindfulness, some choir groups, and an art group, which is quite a nice space for that interest based socializing, because sometimes you find there's a lot of talking groups and talking spaces, but actually there's a lot of pressure around that, and maybe that's not for everyone. So we've got Click and Connect there for that more interest-based interaction with other autistic people and autistic family members and support. So that's all online, and our marketing team will share some links to that. We also have an in-person group in Alloa called Connections, and they meet kind of every week, doing some social activities just in the local area. And we have our one-stop shop in Fife for those who are living in Fife, and they've got an autistic peer support network. So they've got a number of groups within that, online and in person again. And they have parent groups as well for people of older autistic people and younger children as well. And they've got kind of some interest-based and identity-based groups. They've got their LGBTQ plus group as well, and they've got a arts and craft group that's quite new, that they've started up as well. So there's a lot to explore there depending on your locality and where you live. I'm going to hand over to Sophia to talk a bit more about one of our other services that she'll have a bit more knowledge than me. Want to
Yeah.
look for it, Sophia?
Yeah, so we also have a hub based in Dundee called Connections. It's actually hitting its kind of year anniversary in terms of a service. It's a relatively new service, but it's very much around kind of, I guess, you said we did, so actually based on the real needs of the local community, and it's about providing the right support at the right time. So for anyone that resides in Dundee, they can access Connections. Connections is about providing information, advice, and support to autistic adults wherever they are in terms of journey. So that could be exploring whether they might be autistic, to the point of waiting for an assessment, to post-diagnostic kind of type support. And we can provide advice and guidance one-on-one in person. But they also have a variety of different kind of group and peer network spaces. So they have Autistic Peer Support Network, and one that meets during the day, during the week, and one that meets in the evenings as well. But also we have a number of social spaces as well. So we collaborate with other local kind of organisations and agencies to maybe deliver some of those spaces, such as Cake or Dice, Showcase, and the Tech Hub through in Dundee. But also we're looking at collaborating with other organisations like Dundee Rep and the V&A as well to deliver some support to the community. Even though the hub is based in Dundee, there is a kind of slight kind of extension to that service in terms of if people are waiting for an assessment within Tayside, we will still support people within Perth and Angus as well, but that's if you're on a waiting list to obviously access that assessment. So I know that the marketing team have kind of posted a comment below with a link to Dundee Connections for further information. But I guess the things that me and Caitlin have just spoken about there are very much, I guess, what I would probably class as our free to access services. So, you know, actually they're open to anyone within the kind of wider community, dependent on your locality. But I guess Scottish Autism as a whole, we also have, I guess, paid for and commissioned services, which obviously are more detailed on our website, and you can contact local areas in relation to that, but they would be commissioned and paid for in terms of that. So hopefully we've given a bit of a broad overview in terms of some of our services that kind of came to mind. But again, what we can do through the advice line, and Caroline, Caitlin, please chip in if you want to, is that if people contact us about kind of this broad general question, what we can do is look at local opportunities locally that maybe are delivered by other organisations and agencies. We would always do our kind of thorough research and due diligence in terms of other groups to kind of check that actually it would be a supportive space for people that kind of make contact with us. That may well be that it's an autism specific space, and again we would make sure that that space would be supportive and does what it says in terms of that. But we'd also maybe explore people's interests in some respects as well. And Caroline, I'm just wondering whether you could expand on that in terms of what we would look kind of navigate that with somebody.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part, because often in an inquiry we're maybe speaking to a family or an individual, and when we ask about their child's interest or young person's interest or the actual adult, when we ask them about the thing that they're passionate about, often they're quite surprised. But for us, it's a really important aspect of someone, because actually if you've got an interest, it's such a part of your life. And so when we ask about that, I think it's really helpful then, because that helps us understand the wider picture, and it could be there's more opportunities out there for people. And I think that's where the advice line is really helpful, where we can go in the background, have a wee bit of a look around, and actually help people maybe identify what may be available for them personally, related on their particular interests. And it's sometimes surprising to us when we start looking how many opportunities there may actually be, when initially you may have maybe thought there weren't too many, but often there are kind of some wee groups that are absolutely available within a local community or more nationally. So I think for us I think it's always a lovely aspect of an inquiry is to ask about that nice aspect to someone's life. And I think often people are delighted, including parents are delighted, that you've asked about their child's interest, because often that can be overlooked. And Caitlin may have other things to add to that as well.
Oh yeah, I think that's so important, is the interest-based access to support, because it might just take that little interest in something to open up that social world and that communication for someone. And it's important to have those in routes for an individual or a young person to access that world of socialization. And sometimes too open-ended of a group is much harder to access. So even having themes to peer support groups and things like that we find is really helpful for that accessibility point of view.
Mhm. Definitely, and I guess thank you both for expanding on that piece for me, because I think it is a probably one of the kind of personalized elements of the advice line, as well as all the advice and guidance that we give. It's always personalized and kind of looked at from a holistic approach. But I think that is another personalized element of the advice line, or any of our community advice services, where we can kind of explore those things for people, and kind of look at it from a kind of what is your interest, what kind of sparks that interest for you. I'm still keeping an eye on the comments. We haven't yet received any live questions today. For anyone that's kind of joined us partway through the event today, if you do have any questions for myself, Caitlin, or Caroline, please pop them into the comments, and we'd be more than happy to answer those live. So I will continue to keep an eye on, but in the meantime, we'll continue to talk through some of the questions that we have received. And to be fair, we've received a fair few. So I guess the next two kind of areas that we kind of, I guess, spoke about before today, due to the kind of, I guess, questions and inquiries that we received quite a lot of actually as well, is around transitions. It's a big area that we could explore, from kind of those smaller transitions to those bigger transitions. But I guess the two areas that have been highlighted are maybe in relation to kind of the part of the life journey, is probably the best way for me to describe it. And I guess the kind of first kind of question that's coming through is, how can I best support my young person through a transition from primary to high school? And like I say, this is something that we receive quite a lot about, in terms of that transition from primary to high school, and parents kind of very much asking about, how can we get this right for our child? And actually recognizing that the primary school environment is very different from the secondary school environment. And Caroline, I'm just wondering what kind of came to mind initially in terms of that question. What would you be saying to parents that maybe are contacting us?
I mean, I think it's such a big leap from primary to secondary, and there's a range of organisations that we'll kind of come to in a minute that may kind of help with some of that. But from the advice line perspective, I mean, often there's the general aspects of moving to high school, like going from class to class, or friends or groups or stuff like that. But I think equally as well, there's more subtle things, as in often say to families, and what's been organised for lunchtime, what have you discussed that, what about toilets, orientating to get to a toilet, being able to go to the toilet maybe during classes, transitions between classes, all the things that make life a wee bit easier. So it's not about the academic aspects, it's the day-to-day stuff that can be quite important. And I think particularly like lunchtime, it's quite a long time, and what does that child do at lunchtime? Is there a friends group? Have they got other types of supports in place? Is there somewhere a safe place they can go where they feel that they can be safe? Or things like that. So I think those kind of discussions, over and above just the general leap to high school, are also often the areas that we would kind of look at with a family, or at least discuss. And Caitlin may have other things as well that she may want to add to that as well.
Yeah, I think just underpinning everything you're talking about is that level of independence. That's the difference, I think, from primary to high school, is the level of independence expected of young people. It's such a jump, and I think not everyone's ready for that, no matter their neurotype. And I think for autistic young people, it is such a stark jump and a stark change there, that actually, are they ready for all those independent nuances of high school? Even like you're saying, Caroline, going to the toilet and navigating the school in that way, where they've got that less support, and it's a lot more changes throughout a day. There's so many more transitions when you're in high school than primary school. It's different classes, different teachers, navigating a much bigger space and environment with lots more environmental challenges involved with that. Sensory wise, how does the school feel? It's hard to tell until your young person is there how all that will impact them. So it's about feeling able to reach out to the school that they're going to go to before they go there. Can you have enhanced transitions? Can you have conversations for reassurance with the school? What can be done beforehand, but also once your child is in that new space, in that new school environment, what can be done whilst they're there to keep checking in that things are going okay and there's not, you know, undercurrents of masking, and then that struggle will build up. Because I always like to kind of put it in a way, once the trust and safety is broken in school, it's much harder to build that back up than just building the foundation strong before you get there, and those first steps getting there as well.
Hmm. I think you hit a good point there in terms of the trust element, and I think that's something else that probably comes through the advice line in some respects, where maybe trust has been broken along the way, and where I guess kind of school placements have maybe broken away in some respects due to that trust element being broken from the young person's perspective. And I guess, you know, that's another area that we do kind of, I guess, provide support and advice around in terms of how to kind of navigate that part in terms of those conversations to have with the school, in terms of how do we kind of, I guess, scaffold some support here, but also how will my child, I guess, access the education that they're entitled to. And I guess that's where we sometimes work quite closely with other organisations, specifically like Inquire, and I know the team will pop that into the comments below, and even places like, I guess, Salvus and Mindroom and things like that that can maybe support a bit more from a kind of legislative point of view, in terms of what your child's rights might be in terms of that additional support for learning element. But I guess that's where we can dovetail quite nicely and work quite nicely with those other agencies in terms of, right, well, let's look at the autism specific support that your child may need in terms of that educational piece, and that's the same with the transition as well. That's how we would probably work in that piece too. So I think, yeah, it's it's a tricky one to navigate, and I think we try and encourage, when people do contact us, we try and encourage people to start these conversations sooner rather than later, because I think people's biggest fear is the breakdown, longer term, especially if it's maybe something that they've already experienced within school life as well. So yeah, I guess if that's a kind of area of concern for anybody watching, or an area that actually you think, do you know what, I could probably do with a little bit of advice and guidance, then feel free to get in touch. You never know, you might be speaking to Caitlin or Caroline at the other end of the phone, or via email, or our live chat, which is on the website. But again, it's an area that we would probably take some time around in terms of having that conversation and exploring what support would your child potentially need. And again, I guess it's that personalized element to an inquiry. The other kind of, I guess, transition question that we've received, and before I go into that, what I will say is I'm going to do one last play for any live questions. So if you do have any questions, this is your last chance to kind of pop them into the comments below. And if we don't have any, then we'll kind of round the event up after the kind of last discussion that we have lined up. But yeah, please pop them in the comments if you do have any questions. But go back to the kind of question that we have received again around transitions, and I guess, like I say, along the life journey. But the question was around kind of what support is available for young people who are leaving high school, and that is quite a daunting prospect, in terms of leaving high school, because more often than not, that also means a transition between children and adult services. And what does that look like too? And yeah, Caitlin, do you want to kind of start us off in terms of that?
Yeah, I think it can look so different for each individual and what they're ready for. I think sometimes there's these kind of markers of life that we're expected to meet at a certain point in life. And, you know, I always, when I'm speaking to families or individuals at that stage, I always encourage them to look at all paths that they could go down at the moment. You know, it might be that further education is what they want to do and they want to jump into college or university and some sort of life skills environment, or it might be that actually, do they need a little break away from education for a while? Can they explore volunteering or employment opportunities first and come back to education later. I think it's just about your individual young person or yourself. If it's yourself that's in this stage, it's actually taking time to process what you've went through in your high school environment and actually learning from that. What can you take forward that worked and didn't work from that experience and apply that to going forward, whatever that looks like, whether it's just general life and your next step in life, whether that's employment, volunteering, more education-based stuff. How can we kind of navigate the transition of what worked and what didn't over to those things, whether that's, for example, going to university. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to go into a huge university building and experience that even bigger step of environmental difference and change. There is different ways, there's open university, there's online aspects to learning now that we've kept from COVID, and that actually it was a lovely thing that came from that whole aspect. Is there is different avenues that you can go down, and there's different ways to access your goals and your potential in life. And I think that's really important to just touch base with that it doesn't look the same for all of us, and regardless of whether you're autistic or not, there's so many different paths to go down. And I don't know, Caroline, if you've got more to go into in terms of those aspects.
No, I think you're right, and I think also as well, coming back to that thing about interests, if someone's got a real passion and they'll whatever it is they love, then considering that as a way forward as well. And although that can seem a bit ridiculous, but actually often some of those passions could absolutely be something for the future, could absolutely be a pathway to employment. And alongside that, you've got quite a lot of organisations who do offer that post-school support as well. And people might not know those organisations are out there. So you've got the people at Lead Scotland. So there's quite a few organisations that do help. And I think if people contact the advice, and we'll be able to advise and provide that information to see these organisations might be able to help. And then some organisations like Inquire have like post-16 information. So things like that can be really, really helpful as well. And I think just once again, just understanding what is it that young person actually wants, what are they telling us that they would like to do as well. And so other people might have an opinion, but the young person themselves may also have an opinion that is absolutely has to be listened to as well. And just for the advice line, I think there's lots of opportunities that we can kind of help to kind of guide to those next steps as well for the family and for the individual as well. And as Caitlin says, it's not always an immediate thing. Maybe sometimes people having a wee rest from a bit of education or something like that might be helpful as well.
And some really interesting points that you've highlighted there, and also I've been sneakily keeping an eye on the chat, and that question has come in, so I'm digesting what you guys are saying, and actually that you touched upon some elements there which actually kind of feeds into partly the question that's been asked actually by somebody. And I guess, yeah, it's, you were saying that actually, individuals may take different paths, and that's, based on, I guess, where they are, their interests, etc. But also, Caitlin, you made a really interesting point around actually it may well be that leaving high school, that person needs to take time out. And actually, that's because, following high school, they may need to process that experience and take stock of what worked for me and what didn't work for me. And I guess the question that we've had from Patricia is that what support is available for a 16-year-old who feels angry and unsupported by education after 18 months off due to burnout? And I guess it's a huge question there from Patricia. And I'm going to try and break it down possibly. But I guess what I would say, Patricia, is if you want to message your contact details to to our Facebook page, the marketing team will pass that on to us, and we can come back to you and answer it in a more kind of thorough way through the advice line. But I guess let's look at the burnout element for the last 18 months. What would be the support sort of things that we would probably kind of explore in relation to that? And Caitlin, if you don't mind, I'm going to come to you in terms of burnout. What would be the things that would come to mind for you in terms of supporting that individual? in terms of that space.
Yeah, and it's the impact of that that's the bigger thing for me, you know, that element of trust again with the school. That individual very much feel like the reason for their burnout and their distress is rooted in that failure of education, like they feel it's a failure to them. And I think it's acknowledging that and allowing them to voice that in whatever way works for them, I think, is that individual's voice being heard when they're trying to access their next steps. Are they able to express it at this point, or is their burnout affecting their communication? Can we adapt communication to work better for them to express what went wrong for them and what went well, if anything? And maybe if there isn't those aspects of what went well, then what would work well for that individual? And I think with burnout, it's not an overnight fix for something like that. It is very much a process, and it's about acknowledging that time in your life as well, and allowing yourself to process what's happened and have the time to recover from that burnout, because it's so impactful in so many areas of life. There's so many things that can come from burnout, loss of skills, loss of communication. It is really devastating to go through that, and I think it's taking that time to recover as well before jumping back into anything else, like we were saying. And it might be that, is it something else we explore instead of education, because there's that trust broken as a step to maybe getting back to education. But does education not work for that individual as a whole? Is there other ways they can access further the community, whether that's volunteering, apprenticeships, other employment opportunities that may be a better fit for them than traditional education-based learning?
Mhm, mhm. And Caroline, do you have anything else to add in terms of that?
Well, I think kind of Caitlin's kind of summed it up, and I think it is just about that and understanding that individual's experience, you know. And I think that's always kind of the best starting point, because you want solutions based on the knowledge as opposed to us assuming what we think we know. And I think it's really important for that young person's voice to be heard as well. So what are they telling us? What's their way forward as well? And just to echo on what Caitlin has said, it's just such a devastating experience, and it's how people recover from that and just the time it takes. And so I think I just echo what Caitlin has said as well.
Yeah, and I guess it's an inquiry that we, probably seems quite familiar. Unfortunately, we do get inquiries like Patricia's through the advice line, probably quite a bit in terms of that experience. And obviously, it's different for every individual in terms of, I guess, the circumstances or situation that's kind of led up to that kind of burnout, specifically. But I guess she's asking kind of what support is available for a 16-year-old, and that's a really hard one for us to maybe answer kind of quite specifically, because we might want to know the location of Patricia, to be able to answer that. But I guess what I would say, Patricia, is again, it depends kind of what point your you say your son, is it your son, or no, you don't actually say it's 16-year-old. I guess it depends where your 16-year-old is at this moment in time in terms of what is the nature of support that they're looking for. Is it more around well-being and that scaffolding around that well-being element, or is it actually that they're looking for the kind of next step that they want to take, or is it actually just taking stock of what's happened here and what's not worked, and how can I support myself with elements moving forwards. So it's quite a complex one in terms of what type of support is available. And Patricia, that's why I said if you want to pop your details in a private message to our Facebook page, our marketing team will pick that up and send that over to us. And we'd be more than happy to kind of continue that conversation. Whether that be over the phone, via email, whatever your preference would be. We've received another question, and I guess I just want to acknowledge the question. We might not be able to answer it live because I think it's quite a nuanced kind of question in some respects. Again, in terms of location, but I guess the questions around refugee families arriving in Scotland, with a child with a diagnosis of autism from another country, and we know from the advice line that can bring its challenges. and it can bring its complexities in terms of whether that diagnosis is recognised and accepted by professionals, I guess, within the UK, dependent on where that diagnosis has taken place and whether, I guess, there's a bit of a paper trail in some respects as well. But I guess the broader question is around supporting the transition into the country in terms of school enrolment, finding clubs and activities, and just managing the kind of situation of moving from one country to another with very different, I guess, cultures, norms, etc. So I wanted to acknowledge that question, but I guess I think actually that probably requires a much bigger conversation and requires more time than what we actually have this lunchtime. But I wanted to acknowledge it because it is an inquiry that we are receiving quite a few of those types of inquiries through the advice line. And I guess Caitlin, Caroline, don't want to speak on behalf of the whole team, but I think those types of inquiries require a bit of time for us in terms of just looking into those in more detail. And obviously giving the best possible advice and guidance we can in those situations. So again, I'm not going to try and pronounce your first name, but what I'm going to say is if you want to, again, drop a message via our Facebook page with contact details, the team would be more than happy to pick that up and have more of a kind of, I guess, conversation with you in terms of that one. But as I acknowledged, it is a type of inquiry that we do receive through the advice line in terms of navigating that piece of coming into the country as a refugee. It's complex, it's difficult to navigate, and there's a lot of different things that I guess, as you've asked, to consider. So yeah, please get in touch with your contact details, and we'd be more than happy to kind of pick that up out with of the event today. Looking at the comments, I think that's all the questions that have come in. I do apologise if I've missed anybody. If I have, please drop us a private message via Facebook with your contact details, and that can be passed on to our advice line team, who would be more than happy to pick up any kind of questions or give you a call, drop you an email, and we'll take it from there. Caroline, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining me this lunchtime. I've really enjoyed kind of talking those questions over with you, and even the kind of questions that have been asked live. I think, yeah, it really highlights what you guys do over at the advice line and through our community advice services overall within Scottish Autism. I hope those that have been watching have found today helpful. And we'll have another advice line live event in the next kind of, I think it's 3 months or so time, where I'll be joined by another couple of our community advisors from the advice line. So I hope everyone has a lovely day, and we'll see you all soon.